Hey everyone, I think I'm live at the moment, so if you guys could confirm that, that would be fantastic. You can see my very well kept hair. As you can see, it's very, very nice. Of course, the jersey you guys are all talking about, wearing my Darth Vader hoodie. Yeah, basically, this is going to be not the usual type of live stream that I do, where it's like a big, long Q&A and stuff. It's going to be more about exactly what the title says. Which is we're just going to talk about Star Wars The Last Jedi. I saw it yesterday, and what I wanted to do is, because I'm a person on the internet, I have an opinion about this movie. So I see a lot of people making videos about it, and they're discussing it, and they're doing, like, real videos. I thought it'd be more fun to kind of do this live, and we all just talk about it together. I'll read your questions and comments about the movie, and we'll just have a discussion, if that sounds fun to you guys. So keep in mind, this is really only for people who have seen the movie, or people who, I guess, don't care, but you want to watch anyway, which is up to you. But this is going to be spoiler intensive, so I apologize for that up front. But if you've seen it, that obviously won't matter. So I am honestly, I'm expecting low attendance on this one, but I have done a live stream of both Force Awakens and Rogue One after they were over, and I had seen them, so I thought we should keep up with that tradition. That sounded kind of fun. So if you guys are ready, we'll get started here. So what I did when I saw this movie, I hate this time of the year now. It's become like the worst time of year is when Star Wars comes out, because I have an internet presence, which means that I get constant notifications, not only through like YouTube, but I also get emails. Like I have like 4 different email accounts. I have Twitter, I have Facebook, all that kind of crap. So this movie coming out, just like the previous ones, you got to be careful, because some countries get the movie early, and some people just send you notifications and they tell you things that happen you didn't want to know. And I really like Star Wars, so I didn't want spoilers, basically. Hang on one second. Oh, never mind. Yeah, I didn't want spoilers. So I did my best to avoid it. And I went completely dark on, like, I think it was the 13th, something like that. And because I went completely dark, I thought I was safe. So I was I went to San Francisco. I had to do a thing. And then I was coming back. I'm on the plane, and I was on Virgin America. Now, Virgin America is interesting because they don't have free Wi-Fi, but they like kind of do. You get free apps like Facebook Messenger and stuff like that will work. So I was just chatting with friends just to kill time while I was on the plane, and some apps would work even when I didn't want to pay attention to them. For example, Twitter worked. So somebody tweeted at me, and the tweet just popped up on my phone, saying you got a notification from such and such, and here's the message. And it literally just said, again, I gave you full spoiler warnings in the title and at the beginning of this video, so tune out if you don't want spoilers. But the tweet I got before I had seen the movie just said, R.I.P. Snoke, R.I.P. Phasma, R.I.P. Luke. And I'm like, what was the fucking asshole that would say that? Why would you do that? Why would you just ruin a movie like that for somebody? And I mean, I remember when Force Awakens came out, man, people really were being shitheads. Like, I learned that lesson when Force Awakens came out, because I have to, I look at comments all the time on videos and everything. People were literally creating YouTube accounts called Han Solo is killed by his son Kylo Ren. I'm like, what kind of fucking prick does that? But anyway, so that's why I wanted to go dark, and even then I still screwed up, and I heard something I didn't want to know. So that said, like, my Super Potato video came out, and I wasn't even looking at the comment section because I didn't want to know. So that was my experience before I went into the movie. So you have to understand, it did fuck up my emotional reaction a little bit, because I knew certain things were coming. I would kind of held out hope that maybe that was just somebody making some shit up, because, like, for example, people are in the comments right now. I'm not calling you out, White Knight. It's a joke. I know that. But you're like saying R.I.P. Jar Jar. Jar Jar does not die in the movie. He's not in the movie. But, like, I was kind of hoping it was one of those type of things where people were just saying bullshit. Turns out the guy was telling the truth. So that pissed me off. So I didn't get the same emotional punch, is basically what I'm saying here. So I finally saw the movie yesterday morning, and I have multiple thoughts on this. And I kind of want to give you guys my first basic thoughts, and then I thought we could all just chat and discuss things. Like, you guys will bring up subjects and I'll talk about it, and it'll be fun. Please try to keep it Star Wars focused. If you can do super chats or PayPal or any of that stuff if you want. It's again, it's not a requirement, but if you do that, please keep it into the context of Star Wars. I really don't have any interest in switching into other subjects. So we're going to focus on that. Now, I'm watching that movie and I'm expecting The Empire Strikes Back as a remake, because that's what Force Awakens gave us, was just A New Hope as a remake. So my first thing going into that movie was, I was a little surprised when the movie started off being like, timeline wise, like it directly followed the previous movie, like timeline wise. Like, it happened right after, which is, I don't think has ever happened in Star Wars before. There's usually a giant amount of time. Yes, I know Disney and Fox merged. I talked about it in a previous video. I kept saying it was going to happen. That doesn't matter right now. Am I Darth Vader? No, but I am wearing a Darth Vader hoodie. My buddy voices Darth Vader, though, Matt Sloan. You guys are doing a very good job of trying to distract me. Congratulations. But anyway, so I was expecting The Empire Strikes Back, and I didn't get that. I got like half that and like half Return of the Jedi as a remake, like fused together with a bunch of other hodgepodge stuff, kind of fucking with my expectations. And I ended up liking the movie a lot while I was sitting there watching it. I was enjoying myself. This is just my initial thoughts while I'm in the theater. I'm enjoying this. There are parts that are bothering me, but I'm enjoying this. And then there were parts that surprised me. And again, some didn't because they'd been ruined, but some surprised me. I was like, oh, wow, they really did. Oh, wow, they took it back. Like, they did stuff like that. And they were kind of fucking with my expectations. That movie had, I guess I would give it credit for having the courage to fuck with your expectations. So I gave it credit for that. And the parts that bothered me when I was actually watching it, I really hated the idea that the major crux of this film, like the plot device that's kind of holding everything at the center, is the idea that the First Order has caught up to the Resistance fighters and they are trying to destroy them, but they're too far apart for they're too close for light speed to fix the situation, and they're too far apart to go any faster, so they're just trying to outrun them with fuel until they burn up and die. And I was like, maybe there's some scientific merit to that, but it actually really bothered me, because I was like, I've seen so many of these movies where that didn't seem like it was an issue. Why not just send a storm of TIE fighters out of that ship and just have them blow them all out? Like, maybe I missed something, but that seemed very constructed, and because it was meant to kind of hold everything together. And I didn't like that, but it didn't break anything to me. The dumbest part to me was the entire like casino subplot with Finn and Rose. I just kind of thought like that whole thing really had almost no point. The reason it was there was a few different reasons. It was meant to teach Finn a lesson about, like, hey, you gotta be part of the rebels, you gotta be part of the resistance, you have to care about this, which bothered me because he learned that lesson in the previous movie. That was like what he learned already in the first movie. And they kind of rolled it back and to reteach him the same lesson, which I didn't like. And then it was to give character growth to Rose, which is fine, but it didn't need to happen that way. The only other purpose to it ultimately was just to express like, hey, there's other people out in the galaxy that are rebels and that are force sensitive and they care about that. But again, you didn't need to do it that way either, because really what the intended or stated goal of all that stuff was to find Benicio del Toro so that he would, get them onto the Snoke ship so that they could get in there and turn off this special like tracking device. Was really it was like a MacGuffin type of thing. That was the point. And ultimately, they fail at that. They could have failed at it by just going straight from their own cruiser to that ship. Like, they didn't need to construct it that way. And in fact, it's to their detriment, because once they are on that ship, that's how the First Order learns that the rebels are secretly escaping in escape pods. So it actually hurt them massively, because then everybody in the escape pods is getting killed. And so the only good, in my opinion, that really came of the way that whole thing was constructed was when Benicio del Toro is sitting there with Finn and he's showing him bits about how, like, there's, these guys are awful, right? They're selling all the weapons to the bad guys. Well, look who else they're selling them to. They're selling them to the good guys. And it kind of made Finn kind of like on the fence, like, and that I liked that because it made it feel like maybe Finn's going to flip. Maybe Finn's going to change. Maybe this is the direction they're going, is rather than saying the Empire is always good and the Rebels are always bad, they're going to start blurring the lines a little bit more. And I liked that. But that was the only element of that whole plot line that didn't annoy the fuck out of me. I hated that. But other things people have been complaining about, I didn't have issues, like the pogs or porgs or whatever the fuck they are, the little bird things. I didn't have a problem with that. I mean, they didn't need to be there, don't get me wrong, but I didn't hate them. I want to talk a little bit about Poe Dameron. He was fundamentally the protagonist in a lot of ways of this movie, which was kind of strange. And he was incompetent to the nth degree. Like, when you think about it, every single thing he did was wrong. He does three major things in this movie. The first is that he disobeys a direct order, and he does a bombing raid on that ship at the beginning, because he's like, we can destroy this thing. So he directly disobeys an order. The result of that disobeyed order is basically the destruction of the entire rebel fleet, which was dumb. But it's still, the movie tries to celebrate it. Like, yeah, what he just did was great. And the only person who chastises him is Carrie Fisher, being like, you fucked up, dude. But, whatever, we're out of here. I was like, that was dumb. His decision was to ignore people, and he got a lot of people killed. Okay. Second point was, it was his fucking stupid idea to do that whole casino route thing. And what happens with that? They fail at it, and because of that failure, all the escape pods are destroyed, or most of them are destroyed. If Poe had literally done nothing, they would have all escaped to the planet and everything would have been fine. Put it that way. Think about it. The movie is Poe's fault when you think about it. Actually, it is. It's his fault in almost every conceivable way. And my final argument with Poe is that the last thing he does is he attempts that mutiny. And he does it because he's just refusing to listen to anybody. And obviously Carrie Fisher ultimately stops him. And they were right to stop him. Because what he wanted to do was just like do this stupid plan that didn't work when they actually had this other plan about getting to the escape pods. And now I will say Laura Dern's character did a terrible job of just like, telling Poe that instead of she let that situation get way too far. That seemed like a situation where it was constructed on paper and it looked good because an audience that's seeing it for the first time is going to be like, ooh, we're on the side of the rebel and not the big bad government inside the rebels. But really when you stop and look back at the whole picture of events, you're like, he was totally in the fucking wrong. And I hated that. So the movie would have been a lot better if he had just like died in the opening scene, it seems like. Whatever. So that's that for that plot line. When I think about this movie within the context of The Force Awakens. So it's the middle part of a trilogy, right? So Force Awakens is made infinitely more incompetent by this movie. And I'm not saying like, oh, this movie was so good that Force Awakens looked really bad. It's this movie kind of proves a point that I had been making a while back, which is Force Awakens didn't have a point. Force Awakens' point was to reinvigorate the Star Wars brand by basically recreating the most popular movie, A New Hope. Well, Empire is most popular, but A New Hope was the best starting point. Recreating that and trying to do the JJ logic of just mystery box. That's an infamous quote from J.J. Abrams about setting up a mystery box where you just kind of you plant all these seeds and just see where plot lines can go, even if you don't actually have a plan on how to resolve them. And so after Force Awakens, everyone was talking constantly about like, who are Rey's parents? Who is Snoke? What is all this shit? All that stuff. Who is Rey? Etc. And this movie basically made the case that Force Awakens didn't have a plan. They resolved some of those things by, they didn't really, well, let's talk about Snoke on his own, but let's just say they didn't resolve that in a satisfactory way. They basically told you Rey's parents were nothing. They were just junkers. It was just a weird thing, whatever. They did make fun of The Force Awakens kind of openly when Snoke says something like, you were bested by a girl who had never even held a lightsaber before. And then there were certain things they dropped entirely, like the whole concept of the Knights of Ren, which was one of those things that just sounds like, ooh, that's cool. He was like the leader of this cult or whatever. And we'll just make that up and see where it goes. And then in this movie, they kind of decided to drop it. They're never mentioned in this movie. They're referenced kind of once when basically Luke tells a story about how Kylo killed everybody. And then he went off and he took a couple of guys with him and that was it. But that scene is constructed very differently than the way Force Awakens depicted it, where Force Awakens depicted Kylo in his full outfit with a bunch of black, like, hooded figures, and then they were, like, killing people. That didn't happen. So, I mean, the Force, I don't know. But I didn't like that. So that's one of these things where this movie, under scrutiny, kind of fell apart in a lot of places. And I still liked it. I don't want to give the impression that I didn't, but it's one of those things that doesn't really hold up to a microscope. It had the balls to fuck with your emotions, and I give it that. But I haven't seen it a second time yet, and when I do, I might start to downgrade a bit. So I just keep thinking about other things that, like, let's talk about Snoke. Snoke was, when I first saw Force Awakens, like everyone else, I was like, who is Snoke? What's his deal? It's a terrible name. What's the deal? I kept thinking, like, please be Darth Plagueis. Please be Darth Plagueis. Darth Plagueis was Palpatine's master, who Palpatine claims he killed, but I thought it'd be great if he hadn't. Like, he'd failed. He thought he had succeeded, and the guy was in hiding or whatever. It would have made a lot of sense. Especially in this movie when they drop a line about how Snoke was all, like, excited about Kylo Ren's bloodline, because if you guys don't know your Star Wars lore, Plagueis and Palpatine created Anakin. Like, through the will of the Force, they forced the Force to generate a human being, and they lost that person. Qui-Gon eventually discovered him in the form of Anakin. Anakin's blood lineage would eventually be Kylo, so that's if it kind of came full circle like that, it would have made a lot of sense. But I kept saying, even like 2 years ago when I first talked about this in that first stream, I said, like, please don't let Snoke just be some guy who just wasn't in any of the previous movies, has no point. He's just some big, bad, evil guy who has to exist because the script says they need a bad guy. I didn't want that. And unfortunately, it seems like that's what they gave us. Because Force Awakens set it up like you don't know who he is. And in this movie, it was almost like Rian Johnson, who wrote and directed this one, basically said, like, I don't know what to do with this character. Like, he doesn't make any sense, and I don't really want to explore him, so let's just fucking kill him. We'll use him as a plot point for Kylo. That's pretty much all they did. We don't know who he was or what his motivations were, really. He was just an evil guy who was evil, and I hated that. Now, maybe the next one will retroactively say, like, you know who he was. He was Darth Plagueis, or something like that, but I don't know. This movie felt a lot like Disney took in a lot of the criticisms of Force Awakens and just kind of said, okay, we got to do this and we can't do that. Drop this, keep that. Resolve this and don't resolve that. So by the end of it, I was thinking, this is weird because you've basically, I feel like I just saw the end of a trilogy in the ending of that film. You know, at that point in time, the rebels are not a thing. The resistance is barely a thing. The Empire is not a thing. The First Order is barely a thing. The Republic is not a thing. The Jedi are not a thing. The Sith are not a thing. And the movie has this theme about, like, we just got to flush the old and start the new, which is kind of Disney's way, I think, of, like, hijacking the franchise and going in completely other directions. And in a sense, I give them some credit for that because that's kind of ballsy to say, like, the next one, you have no idea what the fuck is coming. But it's a different reaction because at the end of Force Awakens, we were all speculating about those things like, ooh, mystery box, you know, who is Rey's parents, all that stuff. But at the end of this movie, we're kind of like, where the fuck are they even going to go with this? Which is a different kind of emotional reaction and in some ways is good because you legit don't know. So all that was all fine, I guess. So let's talk about some of the characters. Let's talk about the 3 deaths. Now, I just talked about Snoke. Like I said, huge waste, whatever. Then we talk about, I guess the second one would be Phasma. Again, huge waste. Like, that was like almost like Rian Johnson wanted to fuck with fans. Like, because everyone who said, like, Phasma's great going into Force Awakens and she does nothing. It's almost like he decided, yeah, let's just fuck with this some more. Let's, like, have her do nothing and then completely get rid of her. There was some quote from Rian Johnson where he was talking about, he had set up this whole plot line about how Phasma escaped, and he was talking about it, and he said in it, like, yeah, she was in the trash compactor for like 3 days, feeding off mice and shit until she eventually escaped. And, like, after he was explaining it, he realized the problem in his own story, which was Starkiller Base blew up while she was there. So that story doesn't work, so they decided not to even address it. My point is, I don't think Rian Johnson really had much interest in using her or doing anything with that character. So what he did was he included her because he had to, and then just got rid of her because he could. And that's kind of what I feel like happened with that. And I don't even really give a shit. Like, who gives a shit if Phasma dies? She had no point in either movie. It was whatever. Oh yeah, Admiral Akbar. I'm sorry. People are pointing out Admiral Akbar died. Yeah, let's just talk about that for a second. They just kind of... So there's that scene where Kylo's going to fire on the ship, and then he doesn't because his mother, you know, Carrie Fisher, Leia, of course, is on the ship. And so, you know, he decides not to do it. And then his, like, troopers do it, and they fucking kill everybody except, you know, Leia. unfortunately and very ironically. And so you don't even know until another scene that Admiral Akbar died in that scene. You're like, they fucking killed Akbar? That was a little surprising. But hey, whatever. Again, out with the old, in with the new, I guess. I legit believed when that scene happened that's actually how they got rid of Leia. I legit believed that because I thought that actually makes a lot of sense because she can't be in the next one, right? And at the end of the movie, she's the only of the main cast other than like characters like Chewbacca, who's just another dude in a suit. You kind of go like, wow, how the fuck is that going to work? So the next one's probably going to start like way on in the future. And like Leia will have been some great general that everybody remembers vaguely from like the years ago, that she died off screen somewhere in between and you don't know why. That's what I'm guessing. And as people were saying, Super Leia, yeah, that bothered me too when she did her little Superman move. And I mean, there was no great way to do that, but I didn't like what they ended up doing with her in that whole part of the movie. It worked. Her second half of the movie actually worked a lot better, but the first half of her, well, not the first half, but really after that explosion until like she shoots, Poe, like that whole time frame is stupid. And it was kind of like they just didn't know what to do with her. So they put her in a coma, like whatever. I'm guessing that before Carrie Fisher died, they thought this will be good because people will believe that we might kill, Princess Leia in this movie, because, we killed Han, you know what I mean? And then they turned out everybody was expecting them to do it because she is actually dead. So whatever. Okay, so then going to the next big death, you obviously have Luke Skywalker. Now, this one didn't bother me. And the reason it didn't bother me is I kind of felt like that was a logical place for his character to go. We had kind of seen his whole story in the original trilogy, and then this was the logical, he went the Obi-Wan route and he went the Yoda route, where he just kind of failed at both things, and even makes a big deal about that, like, the legacy of the Jedi is to fail. And he ultimately did something that no one had ever done with the Force. He did the Force projection thing. Now, people have been kind of complaining about that and what they call the Skype call between Rey and Kylo, but I was fine with those things. The reason I was fine with those was when we talk about the Skype call between the two, like Vader and Luke used to do that. Granted, it wasn't to the same extreme, and they were more individually capable of it, and there was more emotion involved and all that stuff. The logic, but that power, if you want to call it that, did exist. In this case, it was manipulated by Snoke. Snoke basically installed a Skype on both of those people and forced them to call each other. I didn't like that because I didn't like the idea that Snoke was just like another big evil bad guy in the background who could just do everything. I was like, we did this already with Palpatine and we did it better. Don't do Snoke. I didn't like Snoke. But anyway, so whatever. I didn't really have the issues with that other than the fact that the logic was that Snoke set it up. Fine. But the other thing about Force projection, I had no issues with. And the reason I didn't have issues with it is there was an interesting little callback in that movie to the prequels about, the Force has been evolving a lot kind of lately. And what he means by that is like in the prequels, it was very poorly executed, but by the end of the prequels, Yoda informs Obi-Wan that Qui-Gon has like discovered how to like become a Force ghost, which was brand new. Like nobody fucking knew how to do that. They didn't even know that could be a thing. And he discovered that and started showing it. And that became a thing that existed in the original trilogy. And the Force was just kind of evolving on. This was like a weird next logical move for the Force to make. Because one of the cases the movie was kind of making, especially Yoda and his little scene, which was actually pretty awesome, was the idea that the Jedi were never right either. Just because they were good guys didn't mean they understood the Force better than anyone. They were actually kind of arrogant, and that's largely what led to their failure. The Sith didn't understand it either because they tried to weaponize it. You needed to try to find the true balance to understand, and there was very few people who were capable of that. Qui-Gon was one of them. Arguably, Yoda and Obi-Wan were one of them, and I guess Luke was one of them. And so I was okay with all that. I thought that was actually pretty good. Let's see, what else can I comment on? Why don't we talk about, you guys bring up some points, and if you guys think of anything that kind of sets me off in regards to the movie, then we'll discuss it. How does that sound? Was this Yoda a puppet or CGI? Actually, I think it was a mixture of both, or it was like a CGI'd puppet, if that makes sense. Like they tried to replicate a puppet in CGI, but I really get the sense that what they were doing was a mixture of both things, so that you're never quite sure which one you're looking at. That's an old Robert Zemeckis, he did Back to the Future. It's an old tactic of his where you basically have to create one effect, but you do it 3 different ways. That way the audience can't ever, as soon as they think they figured out what it is, they change it. So so it keeps you guessing. And I kind of think that's what they did with the Yoda situation. I liked that scene a lot. And I didn't notice this when I watched it, but people told me about it. The books in that scene, the old Jedi books, are not actually destroyed. Rey actually took them, so they still do exist. Let's talk about a little bit about Kylo, and let's talk about Rey. I didn't really like Kylo Ren much in the first movie. Like a lot of people, I thought he was kind of an emo bitch. But in this one, I gotta say he amped it up. He was a lot better. He was a lot more interesting. And I believed a lot of his motivations. It kind of surprised me when he switched to help Rey, and then it kind of surprised me when he switched back. And then he just went on like crack. You know, he just ended up being like, all right, I'm going to fucking kill everybody. I'm going to be the goddamn new emperor, all that shit. And it's interesting actually, because obviously Carrie Fisher can't be in the next movie, but if they don't create another lineage somehow, like this was Luke's daughter that nobody ever heard of or something else, it means Kylo Ren is the last of the Skywalker lineage. And the reason that's significant is that Kathleen Kennedy, who currently runs Lucasfilm, she has said that the major films, you know, the numbered ones, the 1, the 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, which they're now saying they're going to go up to 12, is always the Skywalker saga, which means something has to happen. Kylo has to survive. He has to switch sides. He has to have a kid. I mean, we could see an episode 9 where Kylo Ren and Rey end up together, like as a couple. Like, there's so many weird possibilities, I guess. We'll see. But at the moment, anyway, as far as we know, he is the last of the Skywalker lineage, which is strange. What else? What else you guys want to talk about here? Rey herself. I mean, it didn't resolve the whole Mary Sue thing. And she got a lot of shit for that. And then I think this movie kind of unfortunately made it a lot worse because they literally just say like, oh, she's just the child of some drunk junkers who sold her for beer money. And it's like, okay, I can buy that she's a child of just a virgin, kind of like Anakin was. That's fine. But you got to kind of establish that. Maybe that's their plan with the next one. I don't know. The movie could have made an argument that because Anakin was a child of essentially the Force created in some sense for evil, even though he wasn't meant to be, he just kind of ended up that way. One could argue that the same path applies to Rey, but where she was just kind of created to kind of counteract that. My problem is timelines don't sync up because Kylo can't be that. He is not. He is the direct offspring of 2 human beings, one of which was the direct offspring of 2 human beings. And then that one was the offspring of the Force and a human being. So that, yes, it's in there bloodline wise, but it's not the same. So the idea I always liked, and they didn't do this and they probably won't, I really liked the idea that she was the Force reincarnation of Anakin Skywalker. It made a lot of sense to me because it would explain why she could do all these things without really understanding why she could do these things. It would explain why when she touched Luke's saber, she saw the Bespin battle. Like she would remember that because she was there. She was fucking Vader. That made a lot of sense to me. So I didn't like that they really kind of went nowhere with it. That bothered me. But whatever. The finale I thought was pretty good as far as Luke kind of showing up and doing all that. I did think the little dice thing was weird. It was meant to be metaphorical. He talked to Leia, gave her the dice, which kind of held her to Han, I guess. And then she left them there because they weren't real. But then Kylo comes in, he grabs them, and it's supposed to be like, ooh, you literally just lost your connection to the good side, your father, all that shit. But then it made me just think like Luke was focusing entirely on that fight and that astral projection shit, but he also just in the back of his mind he was like, keep the dice there, the dice have to stay there, people have to be able to see the fucking dice, they have to know it's real. And I don't know, maybe I'm overthinking that. Whatever. Obi-Wan's granddaughter. Yeah, I know people talked about that a lot, and I've always liked that idea, and that might be where the Obi-Wan movie comes in. But one thing this movie really convinced me of was the idea that Disney has no direct plans on how to shape a universe with this franchise. They're just kind of going and just letting filmmakers do it. And so far they kind of got away with it, but I'm a little afraid they're going to kind of go DCU with it, where they get too trusting in the filmmaker and let them make stuff that doesn't quite fit. And that's, if you look behind the scenes in the production of a lot of these movies, you can see that they ran into that problem a couple of times, most notably with the upcoming Han Solo movie, which they hired the guys who did the Lego movie to do that, and those guys apparently made a movie that just didn't work at all to fit in continuity, because they just trusted them to make a movie. So then they fired him, brought in Ron Howard, and now he's like reshooting 95% of the movie. It's completely starting over. It's a whole different fucking movie. So I get the feeling that's unfortunately how they're running it over there. And that really becomes more apparent when you think, like, they didn't attempt to do anything in Rogue One that could have been, like, set up for the newer trilogy. Like, they didn't. This is a weird example. Somebody had said, wouldn't it be interesting if the Rogue One characters had survived and we never saw them because they were something else? Like, they evolved into eventually the Knights of Ren. Like, what if those 5 people were the Knights of Ren, and then they had finally come back around and they had been kind of hiding off in the galaxy? Like, they helped the rebels that time for their own reasons, but over time they'd become bitter and jaded, which I could totally see. That would have made a lot of sense, because in that movie all of them kind of had a reason to hate the rebels, but that's a whole different movie. My point is, Disney didn't really set stuff up in that kind of way. And in this movie really proved that they really didn't set things up intentionally in Force Awakens. They just did mystery box, set up a crazy mystery. We have no idea if it's going to pay off or what it is. We'll just kind of throw a bunch of stuff away. We'll ignore some other stuff entirely, and other stuff will be resolved in a kind of unsatisfactory way. So I know it sounds like I'm just sitting here bitching about this movie, like complaining it. I didn't dislike this movie. I want to see it again to make sure I really digest it. I really did enjoy this film. It's just, I can tell it's a movie that doesn't hold up to a whole lot of analysis. And I'm curious on my second viewing, after I kind of know what to expect from everything, what my reaction to it is going to be. Because when people are asking me, like, rank my films, right? Rank the Star Wars films. So dead last of all Star Wars movies that are canon is the Star Wars Clone Wars movie, which is sad, because that is a good show. That movie is terrible, but it is a good show. Then Attack of the Clones, then Phantom Menace, then Revenge of the Sith, then this is where I start to get a little I'm going to say Force Awakens. Force Awakens comes up next. And then Rogue One. I was always kind of on the fence of, like, which one was better, Rogue One or Force Awakens. I always leaned more towards Rogue One. But this movie, Last Jedi, has made me really feel like, no, Force Awakens is worse. So Force Awakens, then Rogue One. Then I would have to say this, probably. And then Return of the Jedi, and then Empire, and then A New Hope. A New Hope is still my favorite one. Return of the Jedi used to be my favorite, but over time my position has changed. What I realized is there's only certain sections of Return of the Jedi I just fucking love, and I think they're some of the best moments in all of Star Wars. But there's so much of Return of the Jedi that I don't like as much. I don't like the whole Ewok stuff. I like the concept, I just don't like the way it was executed. And, like, the first act of Return of the Jedi is boring as fuck to me. Like, the movie does not start until they've already killed Jabba and they're already off Tatooine. Like, that's when that movie starts, in my opinion. Like, if I could, I'd just skip to that part and go from there. So whatever. That's why I made it fall over time. So I guess I would rank it as my 4th favorite Star Wars movie. And at this point in time, again, I got to see it some more times. It's possible I might end up liking Rogue One more. But I just watched Rogue One again the other day, and I was thinking more about, like, all the character development plot issues that it has and stuff like that. Yeah. What are my thoughts on Snoke? I already talked about all that. Like, I'm going to put this video will go up later, and you guys can see all my analysis, but let's do some power round questions about this movie, or if there's anything in this movie you guys want me to discuss that I perhaps haven't thought of, I'd be happy to do so. But I don't want this to go on nearly as long as these things usually go, because I want people to be able to come back and watch it. Nobody sits through those, like, 5-hour streams after they're over. So let's do a few questions like that, and if I think of anything that was good, I'll talk about it at that point. performances were good. I didn't have any issues with that. I guess people are, the porgs or whatever. I think I said already I didn't really care. I am one of the few people who thought, I guess I'm going to apologize for this, but those things, those little like aliens that were hanging out and taking care of the temple or whatever, I didn't have a problem with that. It seems like a lot of people fucking hated those things. I didn't have a problem with that. I actually thought that in a sense made a little bit of sense. Because it was a kind of a religious thing for them, and they were just kind of setting it up, and they were an interesting little comedic relief. But even under scrutiny, you go like, this is supposed to be the most like isolated place ever. And if the Jedi aren't around, why are they even keeping this temple at all? But then it's a religion, so people do stuff. This is a good one. What do I think of Rey's introspection? So introspection being that part where she's like looking at like a million versions of herself. I think that was another one of those things where they were trying to say something, but they didn't know what they were trying to say. They were just kind of letting your imagination go with it. Because the whole point was, hey, like we're going to show you who her parents are. And then they showed her herself, which is another reason. It does give credit to the idea that Kylo might have been lying to her about it. Because he doesn't even know, but he just kind of said that to kind of change her mood. It is possible. But it can be interpreted in a million different ways. And I'm sure that was kind of the point. Kind of like, the Empire one wasn't as hard to interpret, but then again, I'm at an age where when I saw Empire and I saw Jedi, I could see them back to back. Like there was no time to process what the deeper meaning might've been. So I don't know, but I that would be kind of my take on it. Is they're trying to say something, but not really anything. And then they'll let you interpret later what they meant. If Force Awakens kind of proved that was the case. Actually, going into Episode 9, I have to say I'm not that excited, and it's not because I didn't enjoy this movie. Don't get me wrong. The reason I'm not that excited is this, like I said, this movie proves they didn't really have a plan, and you're gonna have J.J. Abrams do Episode 9. J.J. Abrams is the guy who's really good at setting up, as I keep saying, mystery boxes. Like, here, I'll plant all these seeds and we'll see if any of them work and where they go. He is notoriously bad at resolutions, at taking these pieces and bringing them to a satisfactory conclusion. This is supposed to be the end of that trilogy. And I don't think that he's the right guy for that. I don't know. And I think now about all the Star Wars movies we know we have coming already. We got the Han Solo movie comes out in like 5 months from now, which is insane. Then we'll have like a year and a half off until Episode 9 shows up. Then I think we're starting at that point the Rian Johnson trilogy, assuming that happens. I actually don't believe that trilogy is ever going to be made. If you're not aware, the guy who made this one is Rian Johnson. And a couple weeks ago, Disney said, hey, we love this movie so much, we're giving this dude his own trilogy. While that could be true, I have said, even since they announced it, that I don't think that's real. I think it's corporate posturing to just be like, to get exactly that out there. So people read and they go, wow, this movie must be so good. I'm going to go see it. Like, I have to. If they're so confident they're giving this movie a trilogy, bam. Now, when you actually hear about how that deal supposedly was made, according to Rian Johnson, he's the one who said this, when the movie was wrapping up production, he said, it's a shame I have to do this. I'd love to make more. I'd love to make like a whole trilogy. And Disney went, okay. They just greenlit it. And the reason they greenlit it, supposedly, was that they just need content. This dude was excited. Fuck it. Let's do another one. Because they're going to be making one of these things like every year for a long time. But I don't know, man. I'm still very much on the fence about if that trilogy ever gets made. But we'll see. So at the same time you're getting that trilogy, you're supposedly also getting the 10, 11, 12 trilogy. And we now know you're getting the Obi-Wan movie somewhere in there, which I have to say is the one character movie that I think actually would be interesting. I've said that for a long time, like since 2012 when they first announced this. I thought Obi-Wan is the only character from like the prequel era who deserves his own movie. He would be the most like emotionally damaged person in the galaxy. Like he bears the brunt of the responsibility for everything that happened. He's the guy who fucked up and created the Dark Lord of the Sith and all this shit. Like, and then at the same time he has to watch over the offspring of that person. It just seems like a good possible storyline, especially if you get Ewan McGregor in there, because that would actually really make it kind of hold together. I think I would like that. Don't recast. I know he wanted to do it. He even voiced Obi-Wan in Force Awakens for one line. So I like that. Oh, green saber. Good question. So yes, Luke's Return of the Jedi saber, the green one he has, nobody really knew canon-wise where that went after Return of the Jedi. It used to be in stories and was wiped or whatever. This movie basically depicts that he still had it at the time that he was training everybody. And then, presumably, I'm guessing what happened was that when he decided to discard the Jedi Order and all that shit, he probably literally threw that lightsaber in the ocean, kind of like he did when Rey handed him one. I would actually bet that it's sitting in his X-Wing. He's got that X-Wing down there. You saw it in that one shot. And I really liked that shot, by the way, because it gave us a serious sense of false expectation, which I liked. It fucked with my expectation. I expected him to raise it out of the water. I expected her to raise it out of the water. I expected it to fly. I expected him to show up in it. I expected all these things that didn't happen. And I was glad they didn't, because I didn't want any of those things to happen. I just expected them to. So I wouldn't be surprised if that lightsaber is sitting inside that ship. And that might actually be somewhat relevant later. You never know. Like, she might go back to that planet. Don't forget, her lightsaber, the blue one that used to be his, is destroyed. She might go back there looking for answers, looking for information. She might even do a scene with him in episode 9 where she's like Force Ghost talking to him there, because that seems like a place where he could hang out. And it wouldn't be surprising to me if she's like, well, I don't even have a saber anymore. I don't know what to do. And, he just kind of looks down at the ship. He's like, my old saber from Return of the Jedi. He doesn't say it that way, but it's sitting in there. Like, that's what I think might happen there. That's, if I had to guess, I think that might be happening. So that's a good question. Thank you. Anything else anybody kind of wants to talk about? I talked about the Rose Finn pairing. If you mean as like a couple, fine. Actually, I'll say this about Finn. So they have that scene at the end where you think he's gonna kill himself by going into the gun or whatever. It sounds awful, but I wish he had done it, because like his character had no other point in that movie. And it would have been a really good resolution for him. It would have been very surprising, too, to have one of those main characters of the new trilogy die. And for a justifiable reason, like, he is defying the system that he came from. And it all really worked. And I just didn't like that, we got to save him because we can't make dead Finn toys. You know what I mean? So I would have preferred that he had done that. But whatever. Yes, I know the Disney-Fox merger happened. I talked about this in my previous video, so I'm just going to briefly acknowledge it here. Yes, they merged. I kept saying it was going to happen. I was pretty much on the mark. I said it would be about a $60 billion deal. It ended up being a $54 billion deal. And as far as Star Wars pertains to it, the only thing about it that matters is that Fox owned the distribution rights to Star Wars Episode 4, A New Hope. They owned it for the end of time. The original one from 1977. So what that meant was that if they did distribution deals, digital service or like new Blu-ray packages, they couldn't do entire sets because they were not owned by, but they were distributed by different companies. The rights were held by other people. So now that Disney has all of it, they can do big Star Wars box sets that have every Star Wars movie ever made, stuff like that. So that's cool, but there's obviously way more to talk about with that, but not in this video. Chewbacca. Now, Chewbacca was barely used, but I actually kind of like that because he didn't really have a reason to be. And when he was used, some would argue it was annoying. He was with the Porgs, but he was used the way I wanted him to be. He was in the ship and he was shooting at stuff, which was great. He also got an emotional reaction out of Luke, which I really liked. And he made the Han death scene, like the discussion of the death, like more real. I liked all of that. I thought he was used really well. But you can tell with him that Disney knows which characters to get rid of from the original trilogy and which to keep. They kept Chewie, and they kept him because he's a fucking alien. You can make him live as long as you want, and he's a guy in a suit, and he's voiced by the sound effects of a bear. You can keep him around as long as you fucking want to. So that was smart to keep him because people love Chewbacca, and they're always like, "Oh, it's Chewbacca!" He's not going anywhere. But Mark Hamill is expensive and could die, as Carrie Fisher proved. So that they're keeping the characters that won't die. Like R2-D2 is going to stick around. C-3PO is interesting because obviously you can put anyone in that suit, but you have Anthony Daniels. Now, you could always find somebody who does a good Anthony Daniels impression, I guess, but he might be running his course, but we'll see what happens with that. Chewie looked different. Well, he was more CGI'd in this one, I think, than he was in Force Awakens. I could be wrong about that. Yeah, I talked about the whole thing with Laura Dern, the purple hair lady, and how that plot was a little weird. Sorry, I'm not unwilling to answer your questions. I'm just trying to keep this one a little more concise and focused entirely on Star Wars. And if I already talked about it, I don't really want to repeat because I want people to be able to watch this later. Lando should have been in there. That's interesting to debate. We don't know as far as I don't know anything about what Lando was happening with Lando. He could always show up in the next one, but I would think his character would be dead by this point. Obviously not the actor. Billy D. Williams is alive, but I don't know. Milk scene was kind of weird, but hey, Luke always loved that blue milk. What can I tell you? Yeah, I don't know what the fate of Princess Leia is. I still think that there's going to be. I think the next one is going to take place significantly later in the timeline, and it will just be assumed that she died off screen of old age. I'm guessing that's kind of where they're going to go with it. Maz Kanata, I didn't need her in this. She has that like random thing where she's like playing a video game or some shit, or whatever the fuck she was doing. I didn't need her shoehorned into this movie for any reason. Especially in aid of a plot line that was the dumbest plot line in the movie. Like, that didn't need to be there. So I didn't like that at all. Why was R2 barely in these movies? Because they got to sell BB-8 toys. That's why. What did I think about the whole dark hole on the island? I mean, it kind of makes sense that if that place is like the central focus of some sort of force divergence in the universe, like it would make sense that it has things like that. If you watch the Clone Wars show, you'll find there are actually different planets like that, where the force is extremely highly concentrated. Dagobah is one of them. That must be one of them. So it has some of these places that they're so literally injected with the force that they actually fuck with the topography of the place. And so I didn't have a problem with that. This isn't exactly Star Wars related, but it's kind of in there. He says, which universe do you think has a bigger and brighter future? The Marvel Cinematic Universe, DC Extended Universe, or Star Wars? And explain why. Well, definitely not DC, because that one's pretty much on the chopping block and likely won't be continuing beyond just a couple of the movies they already shot. Star Wars and Marvel aren't going anywhere anytime soon. They're both obviously owned by Disney, and they're both doing well. Marvel's a little different because it has a bigger universe. And this sounds weird, but it has a bigger universe of characters that they can make individual films on, and they've proven they've been successful at that, and they're good at the world building. Star Wars has already done a major amount of its plot lines, and it's getting to a point where it's hard to really make movies that are compatible with that plot line anymore. Unless you like try to make them smaller stories, and when they've occasionally done that, people don't really like it. Like, people didn't like the Clone Wars movie. People didn't really like Rogue One all that much. People didn't really like, or probably won't really like, the Han Solo movie. I mean, everyone who's excited about Star Wars, I have yet to find anyone to be excited about the upcoming Han Solo movie. Like, nobody cares. And I think Star Wars is one of these things where it's so, you have a certain expectation of what you want. So when you see something really different from it, you get upset. But at the same time, when you see something too similar, you get upset, which is the struggling balance that something like Force Awakens had to work with. And ultimately it did or didn't work depending on your interpretation. And this is kind of a similar situation, because there's only so many things you can and can't do. The reality is the Star Wars universe, as huge as it is, it doesn't seem like it has a whole lot it can really do that's actually different. And I don't, that's what it seems like. I'm not saying that's the way it is. I as a storyteller, I don't personally believe that, but I can see why you struggle with it, because your fan base has a very specific expectation. And even if you meet it, you fail. It's complicated. How come they can't do Star Wars like the original 4, 5, and 6? You're never going to re-get that. You won't. It's not a possibility. The first one was lightning in a bottle. The second one was really lightning in a bottle. And then the third one, really, I heard this quote somewhere where you say, well, what can you do? It was an Empire. You know, like, you can't always recreate that. And part of what made it work was the drama and the characters and everything. And people, like I said, have a certain expectation of Star Wars now. And as it's grown bigger, there's certain things in lore you have to work with that you just can't. They become like restrictions, and it becomes difficult. Hey, Alden, what's up? We actually did a podcast on my other channel today, and we talked a lot about it, and Eldon was on that podcast. So, do you think Disney needs George Lucas for this? No, I don't think. I think George wants nothing to do with this, and I don't think they want to take him back. Like, George had a lot of creative ideas, but he was always kind of bad at the execution, and I don't think that they really want anything to do with him. He himself said if I got in there, I would just cause trouble and muck it up, and so I think he wants to stay out of it. I don't want a Yoda movie. I don't need it. I've seen Yoda's story. I disagree that we need that movie. Because the only thing you can do is have a movie with him that takes place well before Phantom Menace. And why? My problem with those certain type of character movies is I expect them to hit like certain beats. Like, that's why I'm really annoyed by the Han Solo movie, because I know it's a movie that's going to entirely be created out of quotes from A New Hope. Like, we're going to actually see him do the Kessel Run in less than 12 parsecs or all that bullshit. And I'm like, we're going to see him win, the Falcon from Lando in a card game. Like, I don't care. I don't need any of that shit. And I feel like Yoda's movie is going to be kind of similar, unless you can do some sort of strange, like, movie of just him on Dagobah in isolation and tell like almost like an indie flick about a character like in a single room type of story. But that was the point I was trying to make before, is that fans have a certain expectation of what Star Wars is and is supposed to be, and you can't work within that too much, otherwise people hate it. It's not like the Marvel Cinematic Universe, where people don't really have that expectation. Their expectation in the Marvel Cinematic Universe is, you're gonna fucking show me something weird and I'm on board. Star Wars was not set up for that, and it can't be that. I think that's what they're trying to do a little bit with the anthology movies, but if the reception of Rogue One was any indicator, people aren't really into that shit. And then especially with the Han Solo, terrible idea to do that as a second film. Terrible idea. I don't know I can't believe Kathleen Kennedy greenlit that. That I would have, after that whole thing fell apart with the first guys who were doing it, you should have just cut your losses and just ended production and just took a year off, because that was bad. Like, we don't need that movie. Like, I could be wowed. I might end up seeing it and be like, oh, never mind, this is like an Oscar movie. I just can't see it coming. We'll see. The Thrawn trilogy reworked. I doubt they're going to do anything with Thrawn, because he is so heavily featured in the Star Wars Rebels show now. In fact, I would assume you won't see movies that have anything to do with the prequel era for the most part, I'm guessing. And Rebels is not a prequel era, but it kind of is. I think Disney wants to get away from all that, because it's funny. The one time everyone was upset because the biggest gap in time was between episode 3 and episode 4. And now it's like the biggest, most well-covered gap of them all. It has like this, it has the Rebels show in there. It has Rogue One in there, to the point where we're all like, all right, enough of that. What happened after Jedi and in between Force Awakens? Now that's where everybody wants to focus. And then I think it was Eldon actually in the podcast we did earlier who mentioned one of the problems with this movie was, it was the sins of the father. It was Force Awakens, which is an interesting Star Wars theme, sins of the father. But one of the problems was basically that movie did such a horrible job of establishing the political state of the galaxy that going into this one, you're still not really clear of it unless you've like read the comics or something like that. And so you're even more confused. You're like, wait a minute, you're telling me I've seen all these movies. Like, if you're just a casual moviegoer and you've seen all these movies, you're like, wait a minute. Return of the Jedi ends, Rebels are the good guys. They've destroyed the Empire, I guess. That's cool. Force Awakens, the Empire is like around still for some reason. And then there's like a Republic. I don't know what that is. And then there's, why are there rebels? I thought the rebels already won. What are they fighting against? You get that. And then you go into the next one. You're like, okay, so there is no Republic, whatever that was. And then you have the rebels, but they're like almost completely gone. I thought they won. What happened? And why is the Empire still a thing? Like, it's not well explained. Like, I know what it is because I've read about it a bunch. I understand the political state of the galaxy, and it was just horribly, horribly told in Force Awakens, which is really, really sad. In fact, if there's any TV show that Disney needs to be doing with Star Wars, that's it. It needs to be one that takes place in between those two shows, or those two movies, Return of the Jedi and Force Awakens, and just kind of fills that gap, because that is such a fucking poorly told story area. So whatever. Do you think Mark Hamill will come back for episode 9 as Luke as a Force Ghost? Yes. I kind of talked about that earlier. I'd be astonished if they didn't do that. But they were smart. That's what I was saying earlier about how they know which characters to keep and which not to. You can keep Chewie forever because he's a guy in a suit. But Luke, it's kind of like, I don't know, Mark, how much do we have to pay you to be in this? Will you show up? If not, we don't need you here. You know, we got fucking CGI Yoda. That's fine. Frank Oz is cheap. You know what I mean? Like, you don't necessarily need him. So we'll see. Because I'll bet you that Mark Hamill cost them a lot of money for both of these movies. Because he was in a good position where he knew they needed him. You know what I mean? So, yeah, we'll see. In a sense, it works out for them that, you know, Leia never became a Jedi or whatever, because they don't have to deal with the problem of, like, well, why isn't she a Force ghost? So I think I'm about ready to wrap this up, unless you guys have any other questions or anything you want to discuss about this movie. Because right now, you guys, I mean, I love you, but right now a lot of the questions are kind of like, we're trying to veer off in other subjects, and I don't want to do that. I just want to focus on this movie in general. So if you have anything else about this, we can talk about it, especially if it's stuff I haven't seen. If you've asked a question and it was purely Star Wars related, the only reason I didn't talk about it, unless I missed it, was that I've already talked about it, and you can watch this later. Yes, it's true. Mark Hamill wasn't particularly happy with his character, which, I mean, that's his choice. Obviously, he played him. But like I said a little earlier, I agree with the decision that they made character-wise for him. I actually liked it. Why is recasting Leia not an option? It's just not, dude. It would be... in Star Wars, you don't really recast. I'll tell you a story about Star Wars. The only time I can think of that they ever did a recast was in A New Hope, which of course was the first one, so there were no stakes yet. You remember Wedge was a character played by Dennis Lawson. He's in the TIE Fighter, he's in the X-Wing, and he's Luke's friend who helps him shoot. He's like, I can't stay with you, and click clear, Wedge. You can't do any more good back there. Sorry, that guy. There's a scene before that when they're all looking at the Death Star plans and figuring out, and there's a guy next to Luke who says, that's impossible, even for a computer. Did you know that's actually supposed to be Wedge? That's actually the same character. They recast him because that first actor, the one who was impossible even for a computer, was apparently like a jackass, and he wasn't really cooperating with them, so they recast him. And then, but they didn't really credit him. I think they credit him as Wedge. They both as Wedge. And then years later, they decided, you know what? They're different characters, and you just didn't see that guy, or he died in one of the battles, and you didn't see how he died. Whatever. You didn't see Wedge in that room. They changed him. They gave him his own character name and bio. Star Wars does not really embrace the concept of recasting for the most part. So I can't see, especially such an iconic one. This isn't a background character. This isn't someone who wasn't that important. This isn't like a voiceover change or anything like that. This is one of the most iconic characters of all time, Princess Leia. You're not going to recast her. They might do a little CGI thing with her. They claim they won't, but they also said that coming off of the heat they got for Rogue One. So I wouldn't be surprised if they do some sort of funeral thing and they have some clip from this movie they didn't use or something like that. I don't know. We'll see. Did the dialogue seem too earthy to you? It didn't bother me, but it's something I noticed. What I did notice is there was a lot more real world humor, and I think that's what you're getting at. I wouldn't say it bothered me, but I gotta say I did notice it. But I don't have any great examples off the top of my head. But yeah, I know what you're saying. And since Rian Johnson also wrote this movie and he directed it, there wasn't too many people that were probably going to question him on that. Maybe it's just his writing style. He writes more like a regular person. What do you like better, Disney canon or Legend canon? I don't know enough about Legend canon. I've heard a lot of the stuff from Legend canon. I've heard of it. Of it, meaning I've seen other people like tell stories. I'm sure there's a bunch of great ones. I've never been like wowed by anything. So I gotta say, I kind of agree with the Disney plan of wipe all that stuff and just create new canon. I get it. You couldn't work within those confines. So I don't know enough about it to be able to say like with any certainty that one is better than the other. Why was C-3PO's arm not red? Actually, if you look at the very end of Force Awakens, it's back to gold. He apparently had it fixed in between that time. That's another thing that was an interesting little issue, because this movie seemed to imply that it started right after Force Awakens. But Force Awakens, after the battle scene, there's a lot of time there where, Carrie Fisher changes her outfit, and C-3PO gets his arm fixed, and they all see Rey. They all see Rey off on the Falcon and all that shit. So I don't know. It seemed like a little inconsistency, but if I watched it again, I would probably realize that that shot was, she takes off in the Falcon, and then all of a sudden the First Order shows up. Like, it was probably like that. All right, I think I'm going to answer like one more question and then we're going to get out of here. Again, pertaining to the movie. So let's find one last one that we can just have like a discussion about. So I apologize for kind of the silence here for a bit. This isn't the subject, but Alden, go back and watch this video later. I talk a lot about the idea they handed Rian Johnson a trilogy. Just, I don't think that's actually happening. Let me just put it that way. So many people died in this movie for no particular reason. Like I said, I also addressed this, but I kind of give it credit for that because it fucked with your expectations, which I respected it for. Oh, we just got a super chat, which I wasn't expecting. Generic Interwebs says, my fave to least favorite is now... my fave to least favorite is now Revenge of the Sith is his favorite, Return of the Jedi is his second favorite, Rogue One, Last Jedi, Empire, Force Awakens, New Hope, Attack of the Clones, Phantom Menace, Clone Wars. I don't agree with your list, sir, but I obviously respect your right to have that list. I said earlier what mine actually was. And yeah, we're not on the same list. I've never seen anybody put A New Hope that far down the list. That's special, but I will agree that the Clone Wars movie is the worst movie. Not the show's really good though. Thank you for the super chat. Where Were the Knights of Ren? I talked about that too. How that didn't make any sense. Okay. I think maybe we'll go out with this one. Yeah, because now multiple people are bringing it up. The Broom Kid at the end. So I have multiple thoughts on this. So at the very end of the film, the last shot of the movie is this kid who grabs a broom with the Force, and then he walks over and he starts sweeping a little bit, and then he pulls out his little decoder ring that shows a Rebel logo, and then he like does this gesture like he's going to be a future Jedi. Now, the point of that in the story was to imply, hey, there's other people with the Force out there. There's other hopes out there. Our rebellion is not dead. There's, it's in the next generation, which is they kind of focused on the theme of the movie was like, the next generation, we need to burn this all down and go to the next generation. That was the theme in the movie. The problem I had with it is that the Disney marketing came through with that one. And I think it wasn't Alden, but it was the other guy, this guy named John that we were doing the podcast with, who pointed this out, and he said, the kid is literally wearing a decoder ring. Like that's something you like a little kid would have, that's a fucking toy that Disney is going to make and put in a store for kids to buy because they saw the kid in the movie with one. But when you think about it within the actual universe of Star Wars, it doesn't make any fucking sense for that to exist. Like, if the Rebels or the Resistance had this universal ring that just proves that they're always a rebel in any situation, like Rose uses it in, she's like, hang on a second, we're not bad guys. Look, click, I have a rebel ring. Oh shit, don't you think the First Order would know that and like kill anyone who's got a ring on? You know what I mean? Like, oh, it was Alden, sorry. I'll just give credit to John though, Alden, if that's all right with you. But yeah, that bothered me. And that whole scene, man, it just existed to fucking sell toys. That's really how it felt to me. I did not like that. But at the same time, that's the only kind of place you can point to for like what the next movie might have, other than a couple of things I predicted earlier. It's going to be a lot of, I think it's going to take place later down the road, and it's going to be about just, we're going to understand there's a new state of the galaxy. I think maybe Kylo is going to be much further along. He's going to be way higher sense of power. He's going to be controlling way, way more. And rebels are going to be way down, and resistance is going to be a barely existent thing. They're going to be kind of like what the Rebel Alliance was kind of in Rogue One, but even a little bit before Rogue One, because Rogue One is when the war doesn't start. The Galactic Civil War, as far as the Empire is concerned, the Galactic Civil War doesn't start until the Rebels blow up the Death Star. That's when it starts. In the Rebels' minds, they were at best a terrorist insurgency that just occasionally caused problems, but they were nothing else than that. The Death Star is when the Empire took them seriously. And I kind of feel like we're going to almost get to that point where Kylo is going to be the new emperor of sorts. I say this like in comparison to the old films. And there's going to be barely any sort of resistance. Like Leia's going to be dead, obviously, and Kylo's going to be the last Skywalker. And he's going to be, I think, a little obsessed with finding Rey, who's probably going to have been in hiding for a while. Kind of like, like Vader was looking for Luke in Empire. I think it's going to be kind of like that, but there's going to be kind of no trace of her, a little bit like Luke. There was no trace of him in Force Awakens. I think it's going to be a little bit like that, because that'll cover some problems up, I think. But we will see. So I guess that's it, guys. I want to thank you very much for watching. Appreciate this. I hope that said, my final statement on the movie is, despite what it sounds like a lot of complaining and things I had issues with, I did fundamentally enjoy this film. I did enjoy it. It's a cultural thing, like a cultural touchstone. You do have to see this movie if you like pop culture, I guess. And I would recommend seeing it, as a Star Wars fan as well, because it is definitely a movie that will challenge your expectations, and I do respect that. I will see how it holds up in my mind over the years, after knowing what it is now. But that's ultimately, I would say I liked this movie, and if you want to compare it to the other Disney ones, I liked it better than Force Awakens. Still I think I liked it better than Rogue One, but I got to see it again. So there you go, guys. Thank you very much for watching, and I will see you all later.